Welcome today to my Ceramic 2 students. I might have some Ceramic 3, Ceramic 4s, and the Art 290s watching this video also because they're going to be in all those Canvas links. So this one, I'm going to start directly with, I built this with 3 coil slabs to get to this height. And you can see it's a hollow tube, and this is for the head study. You have received handouts on definition and explaining the components to the face. So today I'm going to be going over how to use this clay and stretch it out, because you can see it's pretty thick, and turn it into the beginning of a head, and how to deal with sculpting the surface, eyes, nose, and mouth a bit. So this has been sitting since yesterday. I built 3 layers really quick. You can see that this is smaller here, bigger here, because if you think of the human head, it's more like a light bulb shape. And if you look at the handouts I gave you, it shows you a side view and a front view of that shape. Okay, so I'm going to pinch this out a little bit. Now, later on, I'm going to cut sections, darts, out of this lower section to bring in the neck. But this is going to be your head study, and remember, it's to explore the components of a head, but it doesn't have to look fully realistic unless you plan to make a realistic head. If you are going to make a realistic head, make sure you have images of the front of the face that you're working with, a 3/4 view, and side view, so you can get a good view of the ear and also the shape of the back of the head. I'm going to start by putting my right hand holding this, and I'm going to push out with my left hand. And then turn, push out with my left hand. And I'm going to start creating more of that light bulb shape that I was commenting on. Now I'm going to go to the middle and stretch it out. So this part here is stiffer than this part right now. So I can still stretch and sculpt the upper section. Now once I've gone around and shaped this, I'm going to take the top, pinch inward, which will start defining what will become the skull cap, the top of the head. Now I will add a layer of clay later to cap him off, and then we'll discuss another time, or another video we'll be discussing how to add hair. Today we're just going to worry about getting basic shape and the sculpture. As you're doing this, you're going to get to this point, and then you're going to want to step back. If you're always this close to your piece or this close to your piece, you're not going to get a good read of the different shapes in light and space. So when you think of how light is hitting it and how you're going to define this chin coming out. Okay, so I'm looking at this to see that I have this flared down right here a little bit more, and this is tighter here. So what I'm going to do, this is going to become the front, because it already has the starting definition of a jawline and a chin. So I'm going to push it out even more to this point right here. And you can see from the side profile that it's coming down. So now I have the chin more than this back side is going to have a skull cap. So and we can add more clay to expand the chin more, especially if you really want to exaggerate and make like the superhero jaw. You know, it's like if you think of like a Superman jaw, that can be done. Or you can make it weightier, so in case a great place to look for head studies is Roman emperor sculpture. So when you look at the heads of the Roman emperors or the patricians, they all have these they were focused on the idea of veritism, or the truth. So the Roman heads of emperors and the heads of their families are very distinctive. So you can see a lot of exaggeration of face, but that's what the person really looked like. Okay. So I'll be showing you, or you'll see a video of some different ideas on this project and how other students have approached it. Now to start with the face, and you'll have a handout that shows you some general idea of this, and I'm going to break this up into quadrants with the needle tool, smooth it all out later as I sculpt. Then you draw a hatch line of where the brow is, which needs to be a little bit lower because it needs a good sized forehead, because we're going to add more to it. Then you do a step down. This will be approximation of where the eyes will be and the start of the nose. Then you'll notice 2 steps down. I always think of fingers, but this is too small, or you can use sticks. So 1, 2 to the bottom nose, and then 1, 2 the mouth. Then of course the chin's below. So from here you literally go and push in with your thumb one direction and then the other, and you'll start creating your eye socket for one, and then the eye socket for the other. So, and of course I got to adjust it a little bit. Okay. So from there, I'm going to make two other lines from here, the top of the eye, down, and then from here across. And right here, it gives you the idea of where the ear will be, if you plan on ears. Now, of course, if you sculpt a figure with lots of hair, you might not have ears. They're going to be hidden. And you might decide maybe you're really into the idea of a skull, then you might not even worry about this part. But I'll go ahead and do it right now. I'll give you an idea of where my ears will be eventually. Now, I'm going to pinch in the middle to push this out a little bit. And if the clay's thick enough, you can actually start constructing a nose from there. And I'm going to add more in a second. And you can see how I have this general shape. I'm also going to take my hand on the inside, push out a little bit there, push out right there a little bit, and then you can always push it back and start creating my cheekbones a little bit more. And since I've decided I want more chin, we're going to push this out a little bit more right here to thicken them up a little bit more. And I'm going to push in the mouth a little bit. And there's the beginning of this head study. Now, from here, I'm going to take a ball of clay, and then I'm going to shape it to look like a large almond. You can see it's pretty big right now, so that's almost too big for that eye socket. So I'm going to cut down a little bit, roll it out of my hand again to make this almond shape. Then I'm going to take my fettling knife and cut it in half. That way I have two equal eyeballs, or close to the same equal eyeball thickness. So I might need to adjust the socket a little bit more, which I will. Okay. So I'm going to put those down and then push this. So this is all about experimentation with space and exploring sculpting. You know. Okay. So I'm going to score inside there. Okay, we're going to slip and score. If you don't slip and score correctly at this point, later on after this is fired, you might have an eyeball that's loose and it's going to rattle around in its eye socket. So just like that. So here I'm going to take this eye, score it, put my slip on it, place it in there. If I need to adjust a little bit, I will. And there it goes. Now you got to be really careful when you're placing it. That's why I use tools like this that are beveled. Sometimes I use little plastic ones. A popsicle stick works if you cut down the edge a little bit. And I'm pushing in around it just like this to make sure it's on there. But you really don't want to push here, because if you push a lot in the middle, you end up with a flattened eyeball, and then you get an eye like that. And that's okay if you end up making this into sunglasses, but if it's an eye that you're trying to make look like a little bit like an eye, then you don't want to do this unless you're really interested in talking about ancient art and Minoan art. Minoan art, the figures a lot of times have these flat eyes that look like they've had way too much coffee. So once I have this in place, there's a couple different things you can do. You can use the needle tool to create the lines of later on where you'll paint and make the middle of the eyeball, or you can take your tool, push it in, and create an eye like this. Some sculptures, they carve out the entire middle out, because then with shadow in the back, it looks like it's looking at you from across the room. So they're always looking like they're staring at you. So from here, we're going to go back to scoring around the eyeball, but we don't want to lose our eyeball. So, and then we're going to take a coil of clay, that's thicker in the middle, We're going to pound it flat. We're going to cut this back edge off so it becomes more of a flat surface. And then I tear them down like this with my fingers and then taper them. Then I can add this eyelid. And the bigger you make it, the sleepier it is, the more open it is, the more wide awake it is. If the eye is sunken in too much, you can always push it out a little bit. And then I'm going to carve this, a needle tool. So back to scoring again. So we're going to add this in, and there's the top lid. If there's excess, you just tear it off with your finger. So it's going to define this a little bit more naturally. Now for years, I've done heads and faces, and for a long time, I couldn't figure out what was funny about them or weird about them. They all look the same, first of all. My guys always look the same. So here's the bottom lid, and I'm going to spread half of that material into the cheekbone in a second. And what happened was I figured out after a couple dozen, probably closer to 50 head studies, I finally figured out what was bothering me about them. It was that they didn't have eyebrows, up here after I was all done. So they look like dolls without eyebrows, and it just became a strange thing to work with. So here's this next piece for the bottom lid. Now you can see here, now I have an eye and a lid. Usually, for today, I'm doing this way. You can push up a little bit and you can thin the edge out a little bit more. You can also use a tool carefully to carve that down when it's a little bit drier. So here I'm defining the line underneath to create more of a shadow. And you can see here, you see that shadow that I'm creating above and the shadow below. Now this extra material here, let's say this is too thick. It's okay to have extra material there right now because I'm going to show you another step. As I use these tools a lot to push down, and you can thin it down as you go. Or let's say you're looking at a sculpture of somebody who's a little bit older. You can also use the needle tool. Michaels has them, Hobby Lobby has them. They have rubber tip tools that you can use to push this out. So what I've done is I've added a little bit more layers to give him a little bit more, like he's getting wrinkles, so he's getting a little bit older. One thing that I used to do in my studio was I would just practice making eyes on the table, and I had this bowl that was full of eyes and the lid parts, and I just kept firing them and throwing them in the bowl. But then later on, they were like sketches. I could pull out a whole bunch of them and decide, oh, is this the eye I want on this sculpture, or do I want this eye instead? And then I could match the eyes a little bit better. Today, we're going to be just looser about this. So for the nose, I'm going to score up, and I've already started some of the structure of the nose when I pushed it out. So there's I'm going to take a piece of clay, and I always tell students that the nose starts out looking like a Muppet, right? If you think of the Muppets or any of the soft body puppets that you see, they have these really soft noses. So I'm going to start with that shape, but I'm going to tap it on my table and start creating a triangle shape. Okay, so here is the triangle that I've created for this. You can see that's a pretty large size nose. So the other thing about this that I always think is fun as I'm sculpting, I think about how I need to fix this, so I don't need that much material, so I'm just going to cut a section off of it to make it a little bit smaller. And there's the beginning of a nose as just a basic triangle. And I'll demo in a second how to turn it into something that looks a little more real. So I score this on too. I'm taking my hand on the inside to push where the triangle is, right here, so I don't sink it in as I'm adding the nose. So there's my nose, the start of my nose. I don't worry about getting really messy with the slip because I'm going to spend a lot more time defining this later. Right now I just need to get the structures in. So at this point, you got to make sure that nose is on there, first of all. And from the side I can see that it's very eagle profiled right now, so I'm going to have to adjust that too. So, and I will. Now the tricky part is making sure you don't mess up, smash around your eye as you're working. I'm going to push up with my finger, and you can see how the shape is starting to develop a little bit. And if it tears out, that's okay. You can still fix it. Okay, so I'm going to push out the middle of the nose a little bit more. And then take my finger and adjust it a little bit more. So what happens with a lot of the very first clay sculptures that students make of faces, they get parts exaggerated, and that's fine. Okay, or like this one's missing a piece right here, so I'm actually just going to take the wet clay and add a little bit more to it first to define that. And then the best part about making heads in clay is you get to be the plastic surgeon. So instead of spending thousands of dollars to fix a nose, you just literally, like right now, I'm going to cut off this section and change the shape. I'm using these two fingers to push and define the nasal cavity a little bit more, or the shadow of a nasal cavity. I know it's hard right now to see faces because everybody's wearing masks in this age that we're in right now. So you can see how his nose has now become this really droopy thing. I normally pick these up and push underneath a little bit more to define them, just like that. For years, another thing I always got wrong with, I would sculpt these noses and I would forget the tip of the nose, this piece right here, and I kept looking at my noses going, they look kind of weird. And here's the best part. If the nose is not working for you, the same thing as I just did before, you can cut the whole thing off and start again and practice that step again. Okay. And you can also push it around because it's still wet. I'm going to take my needle tool and push into his nose, open up his nostril, and I'll show you, I'll lift this in a second. And you can see how I've opened up his nostrils. And now I can pinch out the septum a little bit there and there. So now we have a nose. So the next step, I'm going to leave the nose alone for now. You can always work on the nose some more. Like I've noticed this side's a little higher than the other, but it makes it more distinctive. I'm going to start working on lips for a mouth. I'm going to take a coil of clay, and then another coil that's a little bit smaller. You got to decide, are you going to make them pouty? If you want more of a pouty lip, you make the bigger one at the bottom so he's more pouty. If you want him to be a little bit more happy, you push the edges like that as I sculpt. So it's up to you, but the same thing. If you're not happy with this part as you get to this point, you just cut it off and make another one. Okay. So let's score this. And I will comment, if this is thick enough, sometimes I will actually push the lips out and then start sculpting from there. Today I'm going to go ahead and add them to it. So I'm going to take my upper lip, and you'll notice why I made it so thick in just a second. Put my slip on there. Again, inside hand. It's in there. And the reason it's so thick is half of the material is going to get pushed up into the section above the face. So I'm thinning the lip down. And creating this part of the face that's right here. And I'm going to lift this up so you can see what I'm doing a little bit. Is to make the little bit of an indentation what you see on the upper part of a person's lip. There. I'm going to push this out. I'm going to add a little bit of slip right here to smooth out his lip. Sometimes I use, actually a lot of times, I texture the lip with the needle tool, the grooves that are right here, and just roll it into there. So now I'm going to add the bottom lip. You can see I've stretched out the top, so he has a lot longer mouth. But I started out with that really thick piece of clay and have stretched it out into that mouth. So now the bottom lip, the same process. I'm going to add it to it. And again, I'm going to push part of the material into the chin, and that will define how thick your lip is, or how thin it is. So, and I'm pushing right here underneath it to create more of that curve. take my needle tool. If you get a lot of slip in there, you might need to clean it up a little bit if you want to define those lips a little bit more. Now, if you decide they're too far in, you can always push them out a little bit if you want to give them more of a duck type face. If not, you can always push them in. I'm going to try to make him smile a little bit more, or maybe he's not sure what life is bringing him. Okay. Down here, the chin, I'm going to go ahead and push out a little bit more to add a little bit more chin to him and push out more of his jawbone right here. And same with here. I'm just going to define that a little bit more. So as I go, I'm defining the forms a little bit more because I'm not thinking of it just this way, thinking it from the side view and what we see as we see him turn. Okay. So that gives you the basic components for the eye, nose, mouth, and there's lots of different directions, and I will also tell you probably through email or through the Canvas shell that there's lots of videos on this process in different ways. This is just the way I've been doing it for a long time.